Hi there, welcome to Q&A Tuesday today. My question today is, what is your position on the glycemic index of foods? I've heard that potato has a similar glycemic index to sugar. Is this true? And if so, should we really be eating potatoes? Now, this is a very common concern that people have about some whole plant foods, and I think that we need to start with a thorough understanding about what the glycemic index actually is, because many people think that having a high glycemic index means that the food is high in sugar. And in reality, sugars actually have a fairly low glycemic index. And if we were to judge foods based solely on glycemic index or GI, you'd have to make healthier choices by eating chocolate cake instead of carrots, or cheese-topped pizza rather than potatoes. And the reason that chocolate cake and cheesy pizza, because of their high simple sugar and high fat content, that means that they're absorbed from the gut into the body more slowly. And so these real junk foods actually have a lower GI value than the really sort of healthy foods like carrots or potatoes or even like brown rice. And if you have a look underneath this audio, you can see that I've included a small GI chart of both some unhealthy foods and some healthy foods so that you can see this for yourself. But in generally speaking, healthy carbohydrates like fruit and non-starchy vegetables, nuts and legumes, these tend to have a lower GI, but the GI of grains can be quite variable. Often it can be quite high, and potatoes do naturally have a higher glycemic index. So what does the glycemic index measure? Well, the GI measures the rise in blood sugar in a person over the 2 to 3 hours following the consumption of an amount of food that contains 50 grams of carbohydrate. So this rise is then compared to a standard reference, and that is the rise in blood sugar caused by consuming glucose containing also 50 grams of carbohydrate. And the final result, the GI, is expressed as a percentage of that. So you'll also notice, if you look at some of the popular glycemic index charts, that things like meat and poultry, fish, cheese, eggs, these don't have GI values themselves, or they're expressed as 0, because they contain little or no carbohydrate, whereas most plant foods have a much higher GI because they generally have lots of carbs. And so there's another term that we need to look at also, because in order to make GI more relevant to daily eating, there was this concept of glycemic load that was also introduced, and glycemic load figures in the actual amount of food consumed, and they do this by multiplying the glycemic index of that food times the carbohydrate content of a typical sized serving of the food, and then that's then divided by 100 to give you a glycemic load. And so just to give you an example of that, if we took like a medium baked potato, which has a glycemic index of 85, and it has 30 grams of carbohydrate, we would multiply 85 times 30, and that will give us 2,550. And if we divide that by 100, that's going to equal a glycemic load of 25.5. So while the glycemic index of a baked potato might be 85, the glycemic load is only 25.5. So that's what the glycemic index and the glycemic load is. And the thing is that there's, there are large numbers of carbohydrates found in our foods, and they have a wide variety of chemical compositions and physical structures. And as a result of these complex interactions, when they're digested and absorbed by small intestines into the body, all at different rates. And so this gives rise to quite diverse blood sugar and insulin responses. And glycemic index is just one descriptive quality of a food amongst many. So foods are often described based on their macronutrient content, like people talk about low carbohydrate, high fat, high protein type foods. We can talk about food in regard to the total calories in a serving of food. And other important things to take into account are the cholesterol. That's a very important descriptive quality. Sometimes we might talk about some of the micronutrients, and some like minerals can sometimes be considered important enough to kind of be verbally attached to a food. So the way that people do with calcium in milk or iron in meat. Foods can also be described based on how they function, and one of the functions that we've looked at is the satiety index that's associated with different foods, and that describes the effect of a food on our appetite. So, for example, potatoes were found to be twice as satisfying as meat or cheese. And another way that we could look at food is we could look at the rise in insulin that it causes, the rise in insulin in the blood after a meal. And when we do that, that's measured as an insulin score. And so in this particular case, beef produces a lot more insulin than, for instance, whole wheat pasta, and cheese produces a lot more insulin in the blood than porridge. And that's really important when we're looking at weight loss, because one of the roles that insulin has is that it drives fat into cells. And so having a high insulin score is a definite disadvantage if you're trying to lose weight. So low GI doesn't necessarily equate to healthy food choices. The glycemic index of fructose is 19, and that's about the lowest GI you can find. And table sugar is half fructose and the other half is glucose. And so a diet with lots and lots of sugar in is actually one with only a moderate glycemic index, and that's even though sugar is just empty calories. Remember that empty calories in a food means that it doesn't have any essential nutrients like protein, fat, vitamins, minerals, or fiber. Nothing like that's present. And simple sugars like white sugar also adversely affect the action of insulin and cause weight gain, and they elevate your triglycerides, and all three of those factors also increase your risk for diabetes. So focusing on a low glycemic index diet while ignoring all the other qualities of food is really quite hazardous, because the easiest way to decrease the blood sugar response, so the GI of a food to the dietary carbohydrates, is to consume more protein and fat. And so these are the predominant macronutrients in meat and poultry, eggs and cheese. And hopefully, as you know, these foods are very well established to damage your arteries, damage your bones and your kidneys. They lead to heart attacks, strokes, osteoporosis, kidney stones, kidney failure, cancer. Need I go on? And unfortunately, these days, a lot of people will stake their whole health future on the GI, the glycemic index. But even from a practical viewpoint of daily use, GI is far too complex and quite changeable to sort of precisely guide a person to the correct food choices. And an example of this, where different studies have found quite widely varying GI values. Sweet corn is a really good example because it's been found to have a GI of 37, 46, 48, 59, 60, and 62, depending on what source you actually go to. So what's the glycemic index of the corn cob you're currently holding in your hands, and how would you know? Also, cooling and cooking food changes the food's glycemic index. The ripeness of food changes the glycemic index. Disrupting the food's dietary fiber by grinding or blending or removing the fiber, that also increases the glycemic index of foods. Mixing foods together in a recipe or in a meal results in a glycemic index of the meal that is impossible to predict from the glycemic index of the individual foods. So even with a great deal of effort, you're going to probably be way off any kind of target glycemic index you might have. So really, I think that very little attention should actually be given to the glycemic index. It's just another way to describe a functional effect of food on the body. And unfortunately, many popular diets, and in particular those that promote high protein, high fat, meat and dairy kind of ways of eating, they've placed the glycemic index above everything else in the plans to help you to lose weight. And I really think that to ignore the overall qualities of food is unwise. I think that the high glycemic index carbohydrates that are found in foods like potatoes or carrots don't make them any more unhealthy than do the simple sugars that are found in fruits. That doesn't make fruits unhealthy. And really, anyone who understands nutrition already knows the general concept that legumes, whole grains, and fruits and vegetables are good foods. So in the whole scheme of the nutritional needs of people, the importance of the glycemic index really is very overrated, and I think frequently leads people to make quite bad food choices. So that's it. My 80 or Q is just to ignore the glycemic index of your foods and just eat to the left of the red line from your calorie density chart. So until next time, take care, and I look forward to hearing any questions that you might have.